Listen closely because what I'm about to share could completely transform the way you deal with toxic relationships. If you've ever felt like your reality was being twisted, like you were constantly walking on eggshells drained, doubting your own sanity, then pause for a moment. You're not losing your mind. In fact, you may be waking up to something Carl Jung saw long before modern psychology gave it a name. Jung called it shadow projection, when someone so deeply disconnected from their own wounds, their own pain, their own truth, starts projecting that inner chaos onto you. And the more empathic, self-aware, or emotionally grounded you are, the more you become their target. But here's the truth. You're not powerless. In fact, there's one sentence, yes, just one, that Carl Jung's insights reveal. A sentence that, when spoken with clarity and calm, can stop any narcissist in their tracks. It doesn't escalate the conflict. It doesn't require you to defend yourself, but it breaks the entire psychological game they rely on. And once you hear this sentence, truly understand it, not just with your mind, but with your boundaries, there's no going back. Because you'll never again tolerate being pulled into someone else's emotional chaos. So I have to ask you, are you ready for that level of freedom? Because what we're about to explore isn't just information, it's emotional liberation. It's the beginning of you reclaiming the energy, the clarity, and the peace you were always meant to have. And if you're new here, go ahead and hit subscribe, because this channel is where we cut through the noise and speak the language of truth, depth, and emotional power. This isn't about revenge. It's about rising above. Let's get one thing clear. Narcissists aren't strong. They may appear confident, charismatic, even powerful on the surface. But Carl Jung saw something far deeper and far more unsettling. He believed that narcissists are not empowered individuals. They are deeply afraid of something within themselves. What are they running from? Jung called it the shadow. This shadow isn't evil. It's the part of the psyche we suppress our pain, insecurities, emotional wounds, and rejected truths. For most people, the shadow is something we can slowly integrate through self-reflection and inner work. But narcissists, they refuse to look. Instead of facing this dark mirror, they bury it. And then they inflate the ego to hide the emptiness. Jung described this defense mechanism as inflated ego consciousness, an artificial self-image constructed to block out their internal void. They build a persona so polished, so flawless, that it becomes a mask glued to their face. But beneath that mask is a haunting emptiness and a deep terror of being exposed. Now here's where it gets personal. Narcissists are drawn to people like you, not because you're weak, but because you're the exact opposite. You're empathic, reflective. You feel deeply and question meaningfully. And in Jungian terms, you represent the very qualities they've rejected within themselves. Let that sink in. Your empathy confronts their emotional numbness. Your authenticity exposes their facade. Your self-awareness reminds them of everything they've buried. And that's terrifying for them. That's why they target you. Not randomly, not by accident, but because your presence alone becomes a mirror reflecting back what they're too afraid to face. It's not that they hate you. It's that being near you forces them to feel. And that's unbearable for someone who spent a lifetime running from feeling. Have you ever noticed how the more emotionally grounded and kind you are, the more a narcissist tries to twist your reality? It's not because you're vulnerable. It's because you're powerful. You are, in Jung's words, a psychological opposite. And that makes you both a threat and an obsession to them. They will try to control your perception, undermine your clarity, make you doubt your emotional truth. Why? because your grounded self exposes their fragmented psyche. This isn't a battle of personalities, it's a battle of consciousness. Here's the paradox: they want to be near you, but they also need to destroy what you represent. They envy your emotional depth, but resent how it reflects their emotional emptiness. They crave your light, but it burns. This is why narcissists project. Instead of owning their inner pain, they throw it onto you, twisting the narrative, blaming you, gaslighting you so they don't have to face themselves. But Jung was clear: this projection isn't just manipulation, it's a psychological survival strategy. Their entire identity depends on keeping the shadow outside of themselves. And if that means tearing down someone who unknowingly reflects it back, they'll do it. But here's the deeper truth: once you understand this, truly see it for what it is, you're no longer confused. You stop asking, "What did I do wrong?" and start asking, "Why are they so afraid of my truth?" And that question changes everything. Because once you stop absorbing their projections, you begin reclaiming your power. That's the first step toward psychological freedom, what Jung called individuation. It starts the moment you realize their chaos is not yours to carry. Now let's take a deeper look at what truly drives narcissistic behavior, not just on the surface, but at the psychological core. According to Carl Jung, narcissists are not operating from power, but from profound internal fear. And behind that fear are three core drives that shape their every action: control, validation, confusion. Let's start with the first one: control. Narcissists must control the narrative, your emotions, your perception, your reality. Why? Because losing control would mean facing the very thing they fear the most, their shadow self. Jung taught that the shadow holds everything we've denied, rejected, or suppressed within us. For narcissists, that shadow is overwhelming. So instead of integrating it, they build a psychological defense system, one that revolves around controlling everything and everyone around them. Have you ever felt like your words are being twisted, that no matter how calm or clear you try to be, the narcissist flips it back on you? That's not random, that's control. If they can distort your reality, they never have to confront their own. Now the second driver: validation. To the outside world, narcissists may seem full of confidence. But Jung would argue it's not real confidence, it's ego inflation. They're constantly seeking admiration, praise, and attention, not because it fuels their growth, but because it distracts them from their own inner emptiness. They need others to mirror back a grandiose version of themselves because deep down, they feel profoundly inadequate. Every compliment becomes a temporary patch over a psychological wound that's never healed. It's like pouring water into a bottomless cup. And if you stop giving them that validation, that's when their real anxiety begins to surface. And finally, the most insidious of the three: confusion. Jung described this as the creation of a psychological fog, a mental space where the victim is unsure what's real, what's true, and even who they are. This fog is intentional, because when you're confused, you're easier to control. A person who doubts their own perception will lean on the narcissist for clarity. And that's exactly where they want you emotionally dependent and psychologically entangled. Think back. Have you ever walked away from a conversation feeling like you just went in circles, like your memory, your feelings, or even your sanity were being questioned? That is the fog. It's not a glitch in the system, it is the system. A survival mechanism designed to keep you off balance, second-guessing yourself, and ultimately handing over your emotional power. Carl Jung saw this dynamic for what it truly is: a pattern of unconscious projection. The narcissist can't face their internal chaos, so they project it outward onto you. They make you feel unstable, you feel unworthy, you feel broken. But none of that is yours to carry. The moment you see this pattern clearly, the moment you realize the confusion is not a reflection of your weakness, but a deliberate strategy, everything changes. It's like stepping out of a fog into sunlight. You start to reclaim your inner compass. You stop reacting and start observing. And here's the twist: your clarity is their greatest threat. Because when you're no longer confused, when you stop validating their false self, when you step out of their control, that carefully constructed psychological structure begins to crumble. So ask yourself right now, in what ways have I been pulled into this triangle of control, validation, and confusion? And more importantly, what would it feel like to step out of it entirely? Because that's where we're headed next, toward the path of conscious separation and psychological freedom, exactly as Carl Jung envisioned it. So what do you do when you finally realize you're caught in a cycle of control, confusion, and emotional drain? Carl Jung gave us a radical but liberating answer. It's called conscious withdrawal of projection. And if you truly understand it, not just intellectually, but emotionally, it has the power to set you free. Let me explain. You see, narcissistic manipulation thrives on your reaction. It feeds off your confusion, your pain, and especially your need to be understood. The more you try to explain yourself, the more entangled you become in a psychological trap. Jung called the unconscious participation mystique. It's not just a fancy term, it describes that invisible web you find yourself stuck in when you're trying to reason with someone who isn't actually listening, only strategizing. Have you ever walked away from a conversation with a narcissist, feeling like you just handed them more ammunition? That no matter how much you clarify, justify, or express your truth, it only seems to make things worse. That's not a coincidence. That's the trap. According to Jung, every explanation you give doesn't help them understand you. It feeds their shadow. It keeps the game going. Because deep down, the narcissist doesn't want resolution. They want control. And your emotional engagement, even if it's defensive or desperate, is fuel for their psychological fire. So what's the solution? Jung says you don't fight harder, you withdraw. Not in anger, not in coldness, but in deep, conscious awareness. You stop feeding the shadow. You no longer participate in the illusion that this is a dialogue between equals. You realize it's not. It's a one-way drain of your psychic energy. And that's when everything begins to shift. This kind of withdrawal isn't passive, it's powerful. Jung described it as reclaiming your psychic sovereignty. When you stop reacting, stop explaining, and stop justifying you're doing something revolutionary. You're refusing to participate in their distorted reality. Think of it like this: if you were caught in a tug of war with someone determined to pull you into the mud, the most unexpected and effective thing you could do is drop the rope. No screaming, no dramatic speech. Just stillness. That silence. It terrifies them, because without your emotional reaction, they're left alone with themselves. And narcissists are often terrified of who they are when no one else is validating their false persona. So let me ask you this: what would your life look like if you stopped explaining yourself to people, committed to misunderstanding you? What would happen if you simply said, "I'm no longer available for this conversation," and meant it? This is what Jung meant by conscious withdrawal. Not avoidance, not ghosting, but a sacred boundary born from deep psychological clarity. And yes, it will feel unfamiliar at first, especially if you've spent years trying to heal a relationship by being more patient, more forgiving, more emotionally available. But here's the truth Jung uncovered. You can't heal someone else's shadow by sacrificing your light. When you withdraw your energy, you're not being cruel. You're being conscious. You're stepping out of the unconscious dance that kept you trapped. You're saying, I see you, but I no longer feed you. And in that choice, you reclaim your power. Stay with me, because in the next part, we'll explore the one sentence Jung believed could instantly dismantle the manipulation cycle and why it strikes fear into every narcissist's carefully constructed illusion. Let me ask you something. What if there were a single sentence, just one line that could completely disarm a narcissist, not by attacking them, not by arguing, not even by explaining, but simply by refusing to play their game? According to Carl Jung, this sentence creates a psychological boundary so strong, so impenetrable, that it renders their manipulation powerless. And here it is. I'm not available for this conversation. At first glance, it sounds simple, almost too simple. But don't let that fool you. This sentence isn't just a polite way to shut down a toxic interaction. It's a declaration, a psychological stance, a refusal to hand over your emotional energy. Why is it so powerful? Because it denies the narcissist the very thing they need most: your participation. Remember what Jung taught us. Narcissists thrive not because they are strong, but because they manipulate others into emotional entanglement. They survive off control validation and confusion. They pull you into endless arguments, circular logic, and emotional spirals, not to resolve anything, but to keep feeding their fragile ego. Every time you argue, every time you explain, every time you try to make them understand your point of view, you're giving them what Jung called unconscious participation. But when you calmly say, I'm not available for this conversation, something incredible happens. You break the cycle. You refuse to step into the ring. You stop reacting and start reclaiming your power. This isn't about ghosting or being cold. It's about conscious non-participation. You're choosing to protect your mental space, your emotional clarity, your psychological integrity. And that, for the narcissist, is terrifying. Because here's the truth. A narcissist can argue with anger. They can manipulate explanations. They can twist logic facts, even your own memories. But what they can't control is silence grounded in self-respect. I'm not available for this conversation can't be spun into an attack. It doesn't accuse blame or invite a counter-argument. It offers no emotional fuel, only stillness. It's the verbal equivalent of walking away without slamming the door. It's untouchable. And Jung understood that this kind of boundary is their kryptonite. Why? Because it forces them to face the one thing they've been running from their entire lives: their own shadow, their emptiness, their neediness, their inability to function without someone else's emotional attention. So yes, you might say this one sentence in a calm tone and get an eruption in return. Rage, blame, guilt trips. But don't be fooled. That's not power. That's panic. It means your boundary is working. Let's pause here for a second. Have you ever been in a situation where you just stopped responding to someone's emotional bait and suddenly they escalated? That's not a coincidence. That's a narcissist scrambling to regain control. But when you remain centered, when you repeat, I'm not available for this conversation, and don't flinch, you send a clear message. I don't need to defend my peace. I just refuse to surrender it. This is what Carl Jung called psychological sovereignty. And the moment you step into it, you become what the narcissist fears most, not an opponent, but an untouchable force. Not someone to battle with, but someone who simply cannot be reached through their usual tactics. Because it's not your anger that frightens them. It's your peace. Now here's the part no one warns you about. Once you start setting firm boundaries, once you say I'm not available for this conversation and mean it, something happens. The narcissist doesn't just walk away quietly. Oh no, they push back, hard. You might hear things like, "You've changed. You're so cold now. Why are you being so distant, so selfish, so avoidant?" And suddenly you start questioning yourself. Am I really the one being unfair? But pause. Don't fall for it. Carl Jung predicted this exact moment. He called it shadow projection intensification. It's the narcissist's last-ditch effort to reclaim control because they feel it slipping through their fingers. You see, when you stop feeding their ego, stop reacting emotionally, stop playing their game, what you're really doing is pulling the mirror away. And without that mirror, they're forced to confront something terrifying, the emptiness they've been avoiding their whole lives. This is what Jung described as ego deflation anxiety. It's the deep psychological panic that erupts when a narcissist can no longer maintain their false persona, when no one's admiring them, when no one's validating their power, when no one's buying into the illusion anymore. And yes, it can get messy. They might lash out, blame you, try guilt, try charm, try chaos. Anything to pull you back into that emotional vortex. Because the moment you become psychologically unavailable, they start to unravel. But here's the empowering truth. That reaction means your boundary is working. Let me say that again. Their escalation isn't a sign you've failed. It's confirmation you're finally out of their control. Think of it like this. If a con artist realizes their tricks no longer work on you, they don't applaud your clarity, they panic. Because the power they had wasn't real. It was borrowed. From you. This is the moment where many empathic people falter. You're kind. You're compassionate. You don't want to hurt anyone, even the person who's been hurting you. But here's what you need to remember. You're not hurting them by stepping away. You're refusing to participate in their illusion. And that, according to Jung, is the beginning of psychological individuation. Your return to wholeness. Your reconnection with your authentic self. Now, does this mean you stop caring altogether? Not at all. It means you care from a distance. With boundaries, with awareness. Without being consumed. Because once you understand that they're accusations, you're too distant, you've changed, you're not the same, are actually projections of their own fear and loss of control, you stop taking them personally. You begin to see them for what they are. Echoes of a collapsing ego. So the next time a narcissist tells you you're cold or unreachable, smile quietly to yourself. Because you'll know the truth. You're not cold. You're clear. And that clarity, that calm refusal to engage in emotional chaos, is what makes you powerful beyond measure. It means you're healing. It means you're becoming whole. And most of all, it means finally you're free. Here's the part most people overlook because it doesn't come with fireworks or dramatic showdowns. It comes quietly, subtly. But it changes everything. Every time you say that simple sentence, "I'm not available for this conversation," you are doing something much bigger than creating a boundary. You're reclaiming your psychological sovereignty. It may not feel like much at first. In fact, it might feel awkward, even unnatural, especially if you've spent years explaining yourself, justifying your feelings, or trying to be the bigger person. But each time you calmly refuse to enter their emotional maze, something shifts inside you. That shift is what Carl Jung called individuation. It's not just a fancy psychological term. It's your journey back to your truest self. Let's be honest, most of us weren't taught how to do this. We were taught to be polite, to be accommodating, to smooth things over. Especially if you're an empath or someone deeply reflective, your instinct has probably always been to fix, to understand, to care harder. But Jung makes it clear when dealing with manipulation, especially narcissistic manipulation, those instincts can become your prison. So when you don't take the bait, when you don't rise to the provocation, when you don't explain your worth, you're not just withholding a reaction, you're building immunity. One moment at a time, you become harder to manipulate. You start noticing the hooks before they land. You stop feeling the urge to defend yourself against false accusations. You develop what Jung called psychological clarity, a kind of inner stillness that doesn't get swept away by chaos. And here's the beautiful part, it compounds. Each time you uphold your boundary, you reinforce your self-trust. Each time you resist the urge to re-explain yourself, you anchor deeper into your own truth. Each time you repeat that sentence, you're not just protecting your peace. You're declaring this mind, this energy, this reality. It belongs to me now. That's the essence of individuation. It's not about becoming cold. It's about becoming clear. And clarity is what manipulative people can't stand because they can't twist it, bend it, or weaponize it. So ask yourself, what would your life look like if you were immune to emotional bait? What kind of peace would you feel if you never again had to explain your boundaries to someone determined not to respect them? Who would you be if you were finally free from the need to be understood by those committed to misunderstanding you? That's what this sentence offers you, not just silence, but sovereignty. Not just distance, but direction. And the more you practice it, the more it transforms your entire way of being. It's no longer about winning an argument. It's about exiting the battlefield altogether because the war was never yours to fight. So the next time someone tries to lure you back into chaos, remember, you don't need to engage. You don't need to explain. You just need to stand in your truth and say calmly and clearly, I'm not available for this conversation. And in that moment, without raising your voice or lifting a finger, you'll do the one thing every narcissist fears the most. You'll walk away unshaken, rooted in your own power. And that, according to Carl Jung, is the beginning of everything. Here's the truth most people miss. You don't need to outsmart a narcissist. You don't need to expose them, fix them, or even confront them. You just need to become psychologically unavailable. That means you stop reacting. You stop explaining. You stop participating in the twisted version of reality they're trying to pull you into. And that changes everything. Carl Jung said it best. True psychological freedom doesn't come from changing others. It comes from becoming unavailable for their unconscious projections. That's the breakthrough. When you no longer feel the need to prove your worth to someone who refuses to see it, when you walk away, not out of anger, but out of clarity, that's when the spell breaks. And here's the part no manipulator can handle your silence. Not the kind that retreats in fear, but the kind that says, I see exactly what's happening, and I'm no longer playing along. That's not weakness. That's power. It's the kind of power that can't be controlled, baited, or drained. So if you've reached that point where you've stopped begging to be understood and started choosing your own peace, you haven't just survived the narcissist. You've already won. And if this video gave you clarity, strength, or even just the feeling of finally being seen, I want to thank you for staying with me all the way to the end. This journey isn't easy, but it's worth it. And you're not alone. If you'd like more insights like this, grounded in Carl Jung's wisdom, emotional healing, and psychological empowerment, make sure to subscribe to the channel and share this video with someone who needs to hear it.